The Salesian experience and practice of loving kindness is rooted in the gospel, for sure. It's an imitation of Jesus, who is love, right? God is love, and the compassionate and merciful Jesus. The passage that I would like to present or use in this presentation is the parable of the lost sheep, which is in chapter 15 of the Gospel of St. Luke. We are familiar with the passage, but allow me to read those verses for you. If you want to look at in your Gospel, more than welcome to do that. Again, chapter 15, verses 1 to 7. The tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to listen to Jesus. But the Pharisees and scribes began to complain, saying, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." So to them he addressed this parable. One man among you having 100 sheep and losing one of them would not leave the 99 in the desert and go after the lost one until he finds it. And when he does find it, he sets it on his shoulders with great joy. And upon his arrival home, he calls together friends and neighbors and says to them, "Rejoice with me, because I have found my lost sheep." I tell you, in just the same way, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous people who have no need of repentance. Just 3 key points from this passage related to this topic of loving kindness. First is the context. The context, as St. Luke gives us, tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to listen to Jesus. What in Jesus that draws these particular people to him? Tax collectors and sinners. And the Pharisees and the scribes themselves give us the answer to that question. Jesus welcomes tax collectors and sinners and eats with them. There is something in his attitude, his reputation, and the way he has interacted with these people, with their peers, that they must have heard about him. They feel comfortable enough to be with him. And they're not just being with him, but they are drawn to him. Tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to listen to Jesus. So that's the first point about the context. And then the parable is the response from Jesus to the Pharisees and the scribes who complained about him and his loving kindness toward the tax collectors and sinners. And the third point that I just want to highlight is the shepherd that seeks the lost sheep, even risking the other 99. And he rejoices when he finds the lost sheep. Some of us may be familiar with or have heard that song, "Reckless Love," by Cody Asbury. Now, I don't want to impress you, so I won't sing it, but there's that one about, "There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me," and so on and so forth. "There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me." I will not say much about Jesus as a good shepherd, because that will be another topic for another presentation in the future. But today, just more on the method of the good shepherd. I think the first we can point out is the good shepherd does not look for the lost sheep with anger to punish it. And we know how we have done that ourselves. Let's say we were at summer camp and the kid wanders off, or a parent or an older sibling having to take care of a young kid, and the kid wanders off, does something that he or she has been told not to. I think our first initial reaction is probably tend to be anger. We're going after the kid. Now, we may mean well, we want to protect the kid, but I do not know if we always come across as, "I'm looking for you out of concern for you." At least in my case, it's often, "What did you do? Why did you go away? You got me worried," but not about your well-being and your safety, but what you have done caused the damage or the worry or the anxiety on on my part. Jesus, the Good Shepherd, did not go after the lost sheep with that sense, with anger. I'm going to get you, wait until I find you, I'll beat you up. That's not an approach. He goes after the lost sheep to bring the lost sheep back. And that's why at a different place in the Gospel of John, if you recall, when after Jesus had raised Lazarus from the dead, and people came to look for Lazarus out of curiosity, but these people began to have faith in Jesus because of what he had done. And the leaders of the Jewish people at the time were worried because they were afraid that people may follow Jesus and the Romans may come and destroy them and so on. And so in the in the mouth of the high priest that year, Caiaphas, he said that they would have to sacrifice this man for the sake of the nation. And St. John writes as a comment that as a high priest, he prophesies. In fact, he did not say that Jesus is going to die for the nation, but he in fact is going to die to gather into one the dispersed children of God. The Jewish people believe that the high priest, when he speaks as the high priest, he speaks on God's behalf. So that's why he prophesies. And so we see in Jesus, he has come to gather into one the dispersed children of God, the children who have wandered away themselves. And we know when as I said earlier, when we look for a kid and the kid senses is anger, that's not going to help. But if the kid knows that we are looking for him or her out of worry for him, for her well-being, that's different. So back to this practice or this element of Salesian loving kindness, we can see that Jesus is the master of this virtue. And John Bosco learned it from, even as a kid. Salesians and SDBs, be patient with me and just tell you some stories that you are familiar with, but for the sake of the man with us here. We know Mama Margaret's way of correcting Johnny Bosco and the other boys in the family. That's one way that Don Bosco, I believe, learned this approach of loving kindness. We do not have any recollection, of Don Bosco recollection of his mother ever yelling, screaming, hollering at him, but explaining things to him, even has to correct him when he was wrong, but always with a very clear understanding, even on the kids' part, that this is for my well-being, for my growth. And then the other person that he wrote about is Father Calosso, whom he met as a young kid. So this priest was a priest in a nearby village. And one day, John Bosco was coming home from listening to a mission preaching, one of those missionary coming through preaching about their work. So he went to that event, and he was only 11 years old or so at that time. And on the way back, he walked by and he ran into a priest who had also attended that homily or that sermon. So the priest struck up a conversation with the boy, asked him his age, where you're from, what's your name, where, and so on. And he learned that the boy, little kid, had come from the sermon. So he asked him if he remembered anything. And the priest was impressed with his intelligence and his memory. So this priest took him under his wing and began to care for him, educate him, and provide for him because he's from a very poor family. So that's just a little background. But more important for us today is the way with which this priest relates to this young boy. He said, John Bosco recalls how happy he was. In fact, he said how supremely happy I was. I idolized Father Calosso. I love him as if he were my father. I pray for him and try to help him in every way I could. My greatest pleasure was to work for him. I would have died for him. I made more progress in one day with a good priest than I would have made in a week at home. But here's the reason. that man of God lavished affection on me. And he often said, don't worry about the future. As long as I am alive, I'll see that you want for nothing, and I'll make provision for you after my death. A meeting, almost an accidental meeting with this priest, turned out to be a great experience for this young boy with an adult. He went on to say that I bare my soul to him. This is Johnny Bosco telling his relationship with his father Calosso. Every word, thought, and act I revealed to him promptly. This pleased him because it made it possible for him to have an influence on both my spiritual and temporal welfare. He would go on to say, that was my first spiritual director. And he said, at that time, I did not know that was the case, but that was really the spiritual director for him. Unfortunately, this priest died suddenly, and then Johnny Bosco was left with nothing because of some family misunderstanding. I won't go into that at this point. But anyway, Johnny Bosco then met other priests, and this is his recollection. I would see good priests working at their sacred ministry, but I could not strike up a close relationship with them. Often I would meet on the road our parish priest or his curate. I would greet them at a distance and bow to them as they passed. In their distant and courteous manner, they would return my greeting and go on their way. Often I used to cry and say to myself and even to others, if I were a priest, I would act differently. I would approach the children, say some kind words to them, and give them good advice. How happy I would be if I could talk with my parish priest as I used to talk with Father Calosso. Why shouldn't it be so? And he recalled how his mother kind of explained to him that the priests were busy and so on and so forth. But that was the contrast that this young Johnny Bosco threw up between Father Calosso's way of dealing with him and the other priests. And then so from the very beginning, he learned from his own experience of his mother and of this Father Calosso, the approach of the Good Shepherd of loving kindness. So later on then, as a young priest, Johnny Bosco was just ordained a few months after his ordination. And he described his ministry. He had met this young boy by the name of Bartholomew Garelli. And you can look up that or read about it again. But he had a conversation with the kid. But I just want to share with you something we often overlook is his description of his early meetings with young people who had left prison or he had just come out of prison. He said, I was beginning to learn from experience that if young lads just released from their place of punishment could find someone to befriend them, to look after them, to assist them on feast days, to help them get work with good employers, to visit them occasionally during the week, this young man soon forgot the past and began to mend their ways. They became good Christians and honest citizens. This was the beginning of our oratory. That's interesting how he looked at that way, the beginning of our oratory. And then the next sentence, he said, it was so blessed by the Lord with growth beyond my imagining at that time. So we can see how at the very beginning of John Bosco's ministry as a priest, he put into practice what he had learned, what had benefited him as a boy. The way of the Good Shepherd, of loving kindness, of making friends with people, being kind to them, of going after the lost sheep to bring them back out of concern and compassion for them. I think it's also important to remind ourselves that John Bosco must have understood his patron, St. Francis de Sales, in this practice of loving kindness. Francis de Sales apparently said, this is translation, so we have different versions of it, but more or less the gist of it is, a spoonful of honey can attract more flies. Another version said more bees. So anyway, a spoonful of honey can attract more flies than the whole barrel of vinegar. I like that line, straightforward, images that we can relate to. It's about loving kindness. And then lastly, Don Bosco would write about his preventive system. The practice of this system is wholly based on the words of St. Paul, who says, love is patient, love is kind, love bears all things, hope all things, endures all things. So for Salesians and those who are considering or discerning the Salesian vocation, the Salesians should want to be with young people. And our presence with young people should witness to young people and should bring about the loving presence of God, of the Good Shepherd, the true Good Shepherd. And that's why loving kindness is an element of our spirituality and of our spirit, or our methodology, if you will. Love is patient, love is kind, love bears all things, hopes for all things, endures all things.